Greetings, everyone. My name is Peter Young, and I am your host today and the moderator. I'm a member of the Committee 100, and I happen to be the head of this Asian American Career Ceilings program. We're very, very pleased today to have two really exceptional women executives who, in two different professions, careers in at different points of time, to really focus on this issue of women in corporations. And, obviously there are challenges related to career ceilings if you're Asian American, but if you put on top of that the challenges of being a woman in corporations, it's an extra challenge. So hopefully, what we hope is one, that you get to know these two executives, a little bit better, but also learn a little bit from their experiences and their perspectives, not only about their careers, but also about careers of other women that they know who've gone, have risen through or not risen through companies, as it may be. This is the 14th in a series that started in February of 2020. And we've examined all sorts of different issues, whether it's research done by prominent professors or authors who've written excellent books on the topic, or people who from different professions who were able to talk about why it's different if you're in government or if you're in law or otherwise. And I hope that all of you have enjoyed the ones that we in the past. Before we get started, I just want to announce that the next one will be on July 17th, and we're going to take a different approach. First of all, the title is What Can We Do Better? And the focus is going to be not on what's happening now or what's been done in the past, but what are the kinds of things that we can do across different avenues to help fix this problem, right? Whether it's personal and cultural, family, or it's government or legislative, or being parts of nonprofits that train people. And so it'll be somewhat unusual because we're going to have an hour with some panelists from different areas who are focused on solving the problem. And then we're going to have a discussion tables where we're going to divide people into tables with a discussion leader and really to brainstorm with you about solutions. And then we're going to share the ideas with everyone. So we look forward to seeing those of you who are interested in this particular angle. We look forward to seeing you on July 17th. With that, what I'd like to do is get started. We're going to do it the following way, which is we have a little under an hour. We're going to spend about 40 to 45 minutes in sort of a fireside chat. I will pose a couple of questions to our two speaker panelists in different areas. And then we're going to make sure that there's time at the end for questions from the audience. And the way you ask question is you either type it in the chat box or you type it in the Q&A box. They're kind of the same thing. And the panelists and I as the host will be able to see the questions, and we'll try to address as many as we can. So with that, the first thing we thought we would start out with is really to let each of our two panelists, Jenny Ming and Deb Liu, really talk briefly about briefly sort of walk through their careers so you have a context of what their career experience is, but then try to highlight some instances where they felt that they were either blocked or slowed down because they were Asian American and or because they were female, right? So, and they'll also chat a little bit about what they had to do to try to overcome those obstacles. So why don't we get started? And I guess arbitrarily, we'll start with Jenny, and then we'll move on to Deb. And then we'll switch the order, at other points just to be fair, okay? So Jenny, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited to be here with Deb. kind of my new friend. Um, I told this story quite a few times, but I think it's really worth sharing with all of you because I learned so much in this particular incident. Um, so, as you all know, I actually came from, grew up in Old Navy and was one of the founding member of Old Navy, became their first president. But so when we started Old Navy, we started with 11 people, and I was actually employee number one. We have four co-founders or co-leads. And to cut to the chase, within 4 years, we grew the business from zero to $1 billion. Probably broke all records in retail, certainly apparel retail. And we won many awards and accolades from store innovative store design to, you know, uh, smart uh, business model in our, real estate, um, just many, many more. So in our 5th year, I was asked from my boss, who's the CEO of Gap Inc., was I interested in being the president of Old Navy? And I said, no, I have the best job already. I was the EVP, I was the head merchant. I head up store design, visual, and I was in head of sourcing and production and merchandise plan. I got the big chunk of the business already. And everything was going so well. Business was incredible. The team was working extremely well together. Like, why would I want to make any changes to this? So I said, no, I'm not interested. So during that year, he brought in a lot of people, to interview. And I was on the lineup of interview because obviously I was an important member of the team. And everybody I was bringing into interview, I'm like, gosh, if they are my boss, how would I feel? Or if they became president of Navy, how would I feel? And I really realized that actually I would be kind of bummed that, actually I worked so hard on this and somebody's coming in to head up this business. So a year later, I was getting my review from my boss. And I said, Mickey, you asked me, was I interested in being the president of the Navy? And I said, no, but I thought a lot about it. I'm ready and I want the job. And he laughed. He said, you know what? It took you long enough. I expected you to come into my office a few months ago and you never did. And he said, you know what? You deserve this position. You need to realize that, you want this also. I said, I only would take this job if my co-founder or my co-leads agreed that I deserve this promotion. And he laughed again. He said, only you would think that. Do you think if it was a reverse position, they would, want your approval? Of course, they were three white men, right? I was the only Asian American woman. And I said, no, but you know what? It's really important to me that they are bought in with me on this promotion. And so I became the first president of Old Navy with, obviously, the reason I tell this story is because I think looking back at it, there was a little bit of the lack of confidence that I could do the top job. It's a little different when you are kind of co-leading. And then also, I think there was a little bit of self-doubt and undervaluing my own ability. And, and I think there's a piece that I was kind of scared to fail. That's not an uncomfortable situation. But you know what, thinking back, about it, I feel even more that if somebody else got the job versus me, I would be even more upset. So I share this is because I think, when we talk about, slowing down your, someone that is slowing your career path or someone put a stop to it or blocking it, it starts with yourself. It certainly did that for me. I was the one who really slowing it down. I was the one who was blocking it. And I was fortunate to have a boss that saw the potential in me. But not all of us are so fortunate. So I think the most important thing I think you need to learn in your career journey is really about knowing yourself, really build up your confidence, your self-worth. I think is the first step in your career, breaking the career ceiling. So that's the reason I like to share that with you.
Were there, by the way, when you started out, were there very many Asian Americans or women in the retail?
No, actually, I think you have to remember this is 30, 40 years ago. There wasn't a lot of women, especially, well, there's a lot of women, but there was not a lot of Asian women. But, so many of us, it's, we're more the entry level jobs or, kind of the mid-level buyer jobs. But, it's really hard to see someone rise to the occasion of being, head of a function and then head of a division. Of course, there's lots of changes to that. Now you see a lot more of that because, retail, especially apparel retail at that time, was not really considered a profession, that people, went into. But of course now, being in fashion is a lot more fashionable. So I would say that a lot more people are in this position now.
Now, before we turn to Deb, I just want to say one thing, which is my wife and I was a son who's now in his 20s, but when he was growing up, we basically spent all our time at Old Navy. He was all his clothes were Old Navy. So I just want to let you know we loved Old Navy. So Deb, tell us about your career and where some of the obstacles were and which ones might have been related to either being Asian American or a woman.
The thing that I always think as I reflect back is no one ever tells you we're not giving you this opportunity because you're a woman or because you're Asian. Like the dots are not that simple. And so, there was a recent study that talked about how I think Amazon launched a resume screening process, and it was kind of an AI. And they found out that it was actually screening out women who went to women's colleges, basically, or played women's sports. And it wasn't that any individual hiring manager of the 10,000 hiring managers I'm sure they've had over the years was discriminating. It was actually kind of built into the system. And I think this happens a lot. And so, when I first heard this question, I thought a lot about my career and I thought, what were the reasons why things slowed down for me? Like, what were the areas I got blocked? I grew up in a small town in the deep South with less than 1% Asian. We were actually one of the very few Asian families in our hometown in the South. And so I kind of grew up always knowing that I was the other, like a different person. And so coming to Silicon Valley was very unusual for me. I ended up at PayPal and at eBay and eventually at Facebook. And I was kind of stuck my first 2.5 years at Facebook. I left Facebook after 11 years as a vice president running Marketplace. I built Facebook Pay, built games and a number of other products. But when I was there, I didn't get promoted for 2.5 years. I had 8 managers. I had a child. My father passed away. He was very sick. And, it was just, the first 2.5 years was a slog. And I just remember thinking, what do I need to break through? And I kept blaming myself, like maybe it's me, maybe it's something I'm not doing. But at some point we had actually built the product that I led and the strategy, which I sold to the company, was over 10% of the company's revenues. Yeah. And none of us got promoted. We didn't know why. And so then I came back from maternity leave. I built another product that was 10% of the company's revenues, a second time from scratch. Yeah. I was finally promoted to director. I left eBay as a senior director. And so I thought, what is wrong with me? And you realize it's not that simple. Ascend has a study that said that Asian women are something like, 20 or 30% of tech companies, but are 13% of those promoted, into kind of executive level. So director or senior director and beyond. And so I think it's part of the whole system, but nobody points to you and says, I am not going to promote you because of this. And that's the part I think is hard. It's sometimes we don't ask, but sometimes we don't get, and it's hard to tell. And so rather than connecting the dots and saying it's some direct line, I would rather say, hey, we need to pay attention and we need to learn to ask, just like Jenny was sharing, because I think that resonates a lot. And learning to kind of craft your own career and take ownership of your own career would be the advice I have.
Yeah. Deb, there's somewhat of a quote, conventional wisdom says, oh, gee, high tech, even though high tech, it's, new stuff and technologies, it's not necessarily friendlier towards Asian Americans or women. Do you think that's true? I mean, compared to other industries, or is it hard to say?
Well, the thing is, we always say that, high tech is a meritocracy, right? It's a pure meritocracy. And we say that about school, but in the workplace, it's just so different. And I'll give you an example. Less than 3% of VC money went to women founding teams. And I think something like less than 13% of VC money went to mixed founding teams of men and women, which means that over 80% of money went to all male founding teams. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you telling me that only men have good ideas? That's probably not true, but I think something like 5% of venture capitalists are women. And so I talked to a lot of my venture capitalist friends, and they said, well, especially my founder friends, and they said, well, I always go after the venture capitalists who have daughters, because they are the ones who are most empathetic to a woman trying to found a company, because they imagine their daughter will be in my seat someday. Yeah. And that is a really profound, and I use that as high tech, because a lot of the startup funding is what we're investing in. Who becomes the senior leadership of a team if all the founders are men? It's just perpetuating exactly the system that we have today. And, I think you see that with some of the Ascend studies in tech, which is, Asians are a plurality in a lot of these companies. And yet on the leadership, that's not true. On the boards, that's not true. In the C-suite, that is not true. And you see the drop off kind of fall off, even though, we say, well, minorities in leadership, it's a pipeline problem. Well, it's a pipeline problem definitely for some, some of the groups, and we definitely need to bring in more diverse voices and people of different races. But for Asians, it's not a pipeline problem. We're actually overrepresented in the bottom of the pyramid in tech. But it's those who make it to the top of the pyramid does not look the same way.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it's that if you look at the data, that's kind of across many professions. It's the same thing, that Asian Americans do well. They do well getting into good colleges. They do well in entry level and up to the mid level, and then suddenly they just don't get promoted, right? Mm-hmm. And that this is really where the problem is. I mean, the good news is we've made some progress because, 30 years ago, they wouldn't let you into college, right? And so we're gradually, but there's still, quite a ways to go. Now, for the two of you, if you kind of step back from your own experience and, obviously, your own career, forward and backwards, but you reflect on some of the experiences of, other Asian Americans and other Asian American women. Are there any observations you would make about the problem? Because they may have had a different set of obstacles, right, than you had. Any reflections on that?
I would say this, actually, as somebody commented on this, Malaya commented about kind of growing up soft-spoken in, there's a sense as a woman, as an Asian American woman, you're supposed to be demure and graceful and, and the qualities you teach in a collectivist society, it's something that my parents taught me as well. Work hard, put your head down, you do well in school and the rewards will come. And that's not really how the world works at all. That, in America, the model of leadership is really about assertiveness. It's about finding your voice. It's speaking up. It's asking. And it's like everything that's opposite of what I learned growing up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think
I don't understand it. You, Deb, you and Jenny, you just seem so soft-spoken and timid. I can't imagine why you're saying that. Jenny, do you agree with what Deb is saying?
I absolutely agree with Deb. I have always been, soft-spoken. I know you probably don't believe it now, but, I
don't believe it now.
That's why I say now, because I was voted most bashful in my class in high school. Okay, so that tells you something. But you know what? I think sooner or later you get out of your shell and you realize actually the world is unfair and you have to speak up. But I think more importantly is when to speak up. It's just not noise, but certain things when you have a point of view that you need to really point out. I think the good thing for me was in fashion merchandising, you have to present your point of view. I mean, they pay you for your point of view. So I've learned to, whenever I have to talk about a trend or fashion, I could speak up loud as possible because it's something I love, it's something I believe in. So it taught me to, find my voice. But I think it is very important, but it's when to speak and what substance that you're talking about. It's not just about noise, it's that is important.
It's interesting. The previous webcast we did where we had two prominent professors, one from MIT Sloan School and one at Columbia Business School. And the two of them together had done about 9 research studies on Asian American career ceilings. And they also studied the difference, what were the drivers, but also what the difference between, different ethnicities within Asia. And it's very clear that what you say, the two of you say is true, which is assertiveness is a really key factor, but not, bulldog kind of assertiveness, but, thoughtful assertiveness. And they found that, for example, South Asians have a different level of assertiveness than East Asians. And as a result, that's helped them do better. So the data seems to support, what you're saying. Do you feel there's any particular difference in the middle ranks for men versus women who are Asian Americans from your own experience? Or is it just very similar, or what?
I don't think it's so much about in middle rank that is men or women, this difference. I think actually, I could give you an example. I know when I took the job as in Old Navy, 90%, if not more than 90% of people thought I was crazy. Like, oh my God, you're taking this risk. You know, you're in the Gap brand that's known. You go into a startup that most likely going to fail. You know, I actually, when the job was offered to me, I looked at it as an incredible opportunity. You know, I didn't, even if it was a risk, I said, you know, I'm going to learn so much from it. I'm sure I could find, if it didn't work out, I'm sure I could find another position. So I looked at it as an opportunity, and most people look at it as a risk. So what I'm trying to say is, it's not so much a man and woman thing, it's really taking on difficult assignment that is visible and noticeable will get you your promotion or to the C-suite. I think makes a big difference. So of course, 3 years later, when, you know, Old Navy was successful, everybody's like, wow, Jenny, you were brilliant. How did you know it's going to be a success? Of course, I did not know that. But, you know, what I'm saying is that you do have to take risks in your career. You have to be smart about it, but, you know, don't, you know, do take on the, you know, the tough assignment, you know, the visible strategy and, you know, things like that in the company. I think it really, you know, even if it failed, you learn so much from it, and it's really worth your effort.
But I think both of you have referenced the fact that, or at least Deb referenced the fact that, you know, the traditional Asian family preferences, right? They do get in the way, right? You know,
Yep.
because it's, if you study hard and you keep your head down and you work hard, you'll succeed. And that may be true in certain professions, right? But it's clearly not true in many, right? And I think, Deb, it sounds like you had to sort of fight with your parents, right? A little bit, right? Yes? No? Or you're not allowed to say?
No, my parents were incredibly supportive, but I think they also kind of, they, you know, their expectation for me was they wanted me, and I don't know if you've heard this word, but wonro is a word that means like sweet or kind or demure. And I said to my mother when she said, I pray that you and your sister will grow up to be wonro, which is, you know, sure. And I said, Mom, you came to America with nothing but a suitcase and a couple $100s to go to college, and you never knew whether you could ever go back home. Our grandmother, who, you know, ran my grandfather's company after he passed away, had, you know, barely an education. And so we said, in what way are you telling me that, you know, you're two of the fiercest women I know? And she said, well, we hope for better for you. And I was thinking, that's so crazy for me in some ways, but I understand that feeling, right? Is that the feeling of conformity that's necessary in the, especially the Eastern culture, is so strong that sometimes it is really hard to break past that.
So actually, part of the advice here that probably all three of us would give the audience is selectively ignore your parents. Is that, would you agree? Do you agree with that? Would you agree, Jenny? Selectively.
Absolutely, because my mother wanted me to be a pharmacist, but she had no idea that I was really horrible in chemistry and all of that. But, you know, because it's what a nice Chinese girl should do, right? But no, I think you listen to your parents, but really know yourself. You know, what makes your heart beat? What excites you? What, you know, what is your career? What, you know, how you should follow it. But, you know, you have to be, of course, be respectful too. But, you know, I think parents has changed dramatically. You know,
Yeah.
I think, you know, especially, I like to think, I like to think I learned from my parents to be a better mother. So, you know, I want my children to be happy and fulfilled and productive or whatever they want to do, right? So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I know in my family, well, first of all, Jenny, I know you know my elder sister. She's a
Yes.
Committee 100 member. She was definitely not a bashful person, right? And I have a younger sister who's also similarly very accomplished, but not a bashful person. So, you know, but they had to sort of fight through what was the stereotype of how they were supposed to behave, and it was successful. But, you know, if they had just followed what our parents had said, you know, they wouldn't have been as successful. So again, selectively ignoring your parents is a good idea, right?
Yes. But I think there's also this, you know, I'm sure, Deb, I don't know, you went through it. When there's a room full of people and I'm in it, and maybe I am even the leader of this room full of people, most people would never look at me as the leader, right? Because, you know, being Asian, being a woman, you know, they kind of look around and I probably would be the last person they think as a leader. But that's okay. Like I said, you don't have to always force that. But, sooner or later, they realize actually you are the leader. Sometimes you could be a little quiet about it, but be forceful.
Yeah.
There's a joke on my team where we used to do team dinners, and we would host the team dinners. We'd have lots of people, and not once had I ever gotten the check. I actually make the reservations, like my assistant makes the reservations, and like not once. And one time, like I handed them the credit card with my name on it, and it was handed back to someone else. And I realized that, people just don't expect the Asian woman in the group to be the leader. And this happened with companies we were thinking about partnering with. I will stand with a partnerships lead, and, I lead the product and engineering. And so ultimately, I was the executive in charge of this area, and they would speak to the man beside me. And you kind of do this dance where eventually you're cut out and they're talking to each other and I'm standing on the side. Thinking like meetings where people start talking to both of us, and then eventually there was one meeting where we're thinking about acquiring a company, and the CEO started talking to both of us and eventually only faced the guy. And at some point the guy on my team said, hey, she decides whether we buy you or not. You realize? And I realized that again, being underestimated, but that's how it is often.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
There's a question that we didn't talk about when we were preparing for this, but it's an obvious question to ask, which is, obviously, although men and women should be equal, there's some things that are not the same, which is the men don't have the children, and the women do, at least in terms of, giving birth and so forth. How did that work? And both of you have families, both of you had children and so forth. How did that factor in, and to what extent did it either present problems or didn't present problems, and what are the kinds of things that you did to kind of neutralize that as a factor? Because it is a factor. Well, let's face it, and companies, they don't say anything, but often they say, well, we don't really want to promote because we're worried that the woman will have kids and then leave, right, after we do all this investment, for example. Any comments on that?
Absolutely. I'm sure Deb and I have a lot of comment about this. I, always looking, first of all, I always wanted to be a mom. So I always planned to have children. But instead, there's a lot of women might put aside their career and then have children. I was one that chose to kind of integrate having kids the same time I was working. I had 3 kids, and at one time they were all under the age of 2. So I had a daughter, and 17 months later I had twins. So
3 under the age of 2?
Yes, and that was when I took the job at the Gap. That I require a lot of, traveling. But, I think, for one, is having a very supportive husband or partner makes a huge difference, and having great help works. But you know what? I'm one to really believe that you can integrate, having kids and, and work at the same time. In fact, my boss told me many years later when he was interviewing me, when he heard that I have 3 kids, he said, you were put together, you were sane, and you were neat and organized, and you have 3 children. That was good enough for me to hire you.
Yeah, if you could do all that, just think.
Exactly. He's like, I think you could do anything. So it was a very positive. And I never was one to afraid to bring my children to work. I actually, during holidays, I would bring them in. They would clean everybody's recycle bin. I want to incorporate my kids into my, career and at work. So they know where I work, and people at work know my kids. And it worked well. And I am a big believer. I support a lot of women and men having children at work. I think it's just part of very smart work environment that supports women. And I find that most women actually come back to work is because they feel supported and they feel like they have a stable environment. So actually they change job much less is because of the supportive environment. So I'm known to be very, especially being a working mother, is who I am, is something I believe in. I think it made me a better balanced leader and a boss because I am a working mother, and I'm very understanding of that. When I'm at work, I'm truly at work, and then I have a schedule. I want to go home and have dinner with my family. So I think we tend to be very efficient, and we could balance a lot of things and juggle a lot of things, in the air and make things happen.
Deb, how about you? You have a couple of kids, right?
3 kids as well. Not all.
Excuse me, now, is the formula for success to have 3 kids? Is that?
That is absolutely.
Is that the
Yes.
conclusion that we should take from all of this? Yeah, okay, so all in the audience, you have 3 kids, because that's the key to success. So go
That's
ahead, Deb.
Well, I would say there's 2 pieces of advice I would have, especially for the women out there. One is, Sheryl Sandberg once said that the most important career decision you ever make is who you choose to marry, who your partner is. That is absolutely true. My husband is incredibly supportive and accomplished in his own right, but I could not have done any of this without his support. And I think that we have kind of a marriage where it's really a true partnership. And that's not always the case for everyone. If you're the person who has to manage all the household schedules, all the summer camps, taking and picking up the kids, all of the food, it's a very different life than one where you have a true partner like Jenny and I have had.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, in my case, I have a pretty high-powered wife. She's a dean of a large school at Columbia. Was a judge of Supreme Court judge at WTO. She was a lot of very, very prominent positions. And I'm trying to be very supportive, and I have a very busy career, and the balance is very important. But I will tell a short story of why it wasn't perfect. She once went away for a week because they had court hearings in Geneva, so forth. And for a week, she said, "You're okay, you can take care of our son," who was about 8 at the time. And I said, she came back and she said, "How'd it go?" I said, "Everything perfect. He went to school, he was this and that, everything worked out." So she went to talk to her son. She came down, she says, "Are you still willing to say that everything was perfect? You got everything done?" I said, "Well, of course." She said, "Your son has not had a bath in the last week?" I said, "Really?" I said, and the subject never came up. So I learned there that even though I tried very hard, I clearly was not perfect, So now, one of the other questions is, is this generational thing? And Jenny, you started in business somewhat earlier than Deb, and then we have some members of Committee 100, and even the founder, like Shirley Young, who succeeded as a senior executive at General Motors, very early on, at a time where there were barely any women, in large corporations at all. Do you sense at all, the 2 of you, that there are any differences from a generational point of view, in terms of this challenge? Is it less challenging now, or is it, or it's just different? What's your view?
I'm going to let Deb go first. She's the one who said we don't have any generation gap. That was
No, I was like, we're not that far away from Jenny, but
she's so kind.
in Shirley's day, if you look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, there were a lot of women who just weren't even allowed to have jobs in these corporations. We're not hired. We're not, even if you could get into college to get the degree that you wanted, a lot of people had to fight through a certain amount of discrimination even to have jobs. And I've spoken to some women of that generation, and just these stories they tell, and I think they went in knowing they had to fight. I think by the time I graduated from school, women were getting more college degrees and graduate degrees than men. And so it was just a very different time. And so we figured it's a meritocracy now. We've won, it is equal. And then you get out into the workforce and it is not at all what you think it is. And I think that makes it really challenging, is to walk into the world with one set of expectations, and then you don't notice until you hit the wall for the first time. And when you hit the wall, you wonder, is it me? Or is it the system, or is it both? And what happens? And I think that's the challenge, I see is I speak at the GSB at Stanford every year, and I say the same thing. Is I sat on that side of the chair at one point, and I thought everything was fair when you get out to the workforce, and it's nothing like you think it is. And if you take nothing away from what I say, just remember that we're not there yet. There's still a wage gap, there's still opportunity gaps, there's still promotion gaps, and you can't expect that the world is fair. You have to learn to ask for what you need, and you have to learn that it's not going to be easy. But at the same time, if you go in with the illusion that everything is fair, you don't know what the playing field is like, then I think you're going to be in for a rude awakening, just like I was.
Yeah, that's right. Jenny?
I think to add on to what Deb said is, I think we make progress, but we're still so far from where we would want it to be. So I like to think every generation has made improvements and progress, but when you look at the stats, it tells you, we still have a long way to go. So I think if nothing else we do is really help and encourage more women in leadership, more women on boards. I mean, that's something that I am very, very focused on. How could I help more women to get where they want to be?
Yeah. Well, you know, and part of the problem, certainly in terms of the Asian American issue, is there are a lot of people in this country who don't perceive that Asian Americans have a problem, you know, because they, you know, they see all these people getting to good schools and so forth and so on, and they just don't realize, they're not aware that actually there's a problem, right? And so actually the funny thing is, in many cases, you know, well-intentioned people trying to create diversity and so forth, they don't necessarily work on trying to help the Asian Americans, and they focus on other ethnic groups because those groups are, quote, perceived as having more problems with regard to discrimination. So, you know, in part of this is, you got to let people become aware that it's a problem, right? And if you don't, you know, they just may not have been aware that they have a problem to solve, right? What I'd like to do is then turn the next question, which is, you know, we talked a lot about what some of the problems are, what you did to overcome them, and so forth. But, you know, I guess the next question is, what are some of the solutions that you see that either companies or government or organizations can that you, if we, to the extent that we can get them to do that, that they should be doing in order to try to address this issue, either just Asian American or Asian American woman, you know, either one.
You want to start, Chimie?
No, you could.
One of the things I think is, look, when you have data, then you know what the problem is. I think for so long we just brushed everything aside and we didn't look at the data, but now we see that data and we see where people are falling off. We see, you know, how many, you know, women and women of color in particular are making it to boards. We're seeing the disparity between kind of starting your career and ending, and where you end your career. And I think that that data is really important because it shows us where our gaps are and what we need to do. And, you know, that's the first step. But then it's also really kind of understanding systematically how the data got to where it is and unpacking that. Just like when you build a product or when you're selling something, you look and see what's selling, right? What's hot? What are the trends? And then you have to understand and unpack why. And asking ourselves why, and not just saying, well, this is just the way it is, and being dissatisfied with kind of where we are. You know, I hear, and this is one of my biggest pet peeves, a lot of people say, well, I would hire more diverse people, you know, more women and minorities, but I wouldn't want to lower the bar. And my answer to that is, you're terrible at statistics if that's what you say. Because if you're hiring a small group of people, by opening up the pool to more people who are qualified for your job, you're more likely to pick the best person. And actually in any distribution of people, you are most likely to hire a better person if you actually explore more candidates of different backgrounds. And so I think sometimes we just, you know, the system has worked for so long that we don't realize that we're showing the cracks in that system, and it's giving us an opportunity to bring in more voices and build better products and build better companies because we are more open to it. But only if we're willing to look at the data and face down what it is and what we're willing to do to make changes.
Yeah, and I also think that within companies, you need to create some unity and some, shall we say, power through some numbers. And I think, therefore, like if you're in a large company, it's a good idea to get the other Asian Americans together and talk about the issue, but also help senior management be aware of the issue and so forth. Because if you just go by yourself, they're not going to listen as much as if there's a group, a large enough group to you know, to do something about it, right? And you know, Jenny, your view on this issue of what should companies and organizations and governments should do?
I agree with that. The first thing is really realizing your statistics, like what are the success rate of, you know, women or women of color or Asian Americans. But I think it starts really from the beginning of really hiring great talent. And we tend to always think Asian does really well and technical functions like, you know, IT or accounting or finance, but really hiring across all functions. And I think it's really important to mentor and have sponsorship. What I mean by is giving them someone to talk to, you know, telling them when they're doing something well, or what are some of the, you know, some of the difficulty they are facing, that they have someone to go to and really help them and give them good feedback. like I said, what they do well, what they are working on, what are the opportunities, and get them, in tougher assignments, visible jobs that, people know, tracking how they're doing. I think all of those will lead to better promotions. But, I think one thing I learned is really how to build relationship inside a company is very important. We, of course, always say, result matter. Of course it does. But result, and then also building relationship and having people know your accomplishment is very important, because so many people that don't have a relationship, people don't know what to make of them. You say, could they really lead? But if they get to know you, they already automatically see you, hopefully in a leadership position. So building relationship matters to a lot of people. So I always tell people, I say, really learn to know yourself, who you are, so that you could, what you stand for, that you could show up and be your authentic self is very important in a company, especially a large company.
Yeah. And, one of the problems I think that some of our previous speakers talked about is that Asian Americans aren't really good at mentoring other people, right? It's just, the story, I remember the first one we did February of 2020, one of the speakers said a great quote and said, if it's a Western guy, they say, well, there's a mountain. They say, let's work together to get up the mountain. And he said, if it's Chinese, then the guy will say, or the gal will say, well, if you ever get up to the top of the mountain, I'll say hello to you. So I think there's a measure of truth that, but there's a catch-22, which is, if there aren't that many Asians at the top, then there aren't that many Asians for you to be mentored, who will mentor you at the top, right? So I think what is true is people have to explicitly say, okay, whether the people at the top are Asian or not, I have to establish relationships and mentors. And maybe over time, right, there'll be more Asians who can mentor younger people, but I got to live with the fact that there's a timing problem, right? But the other is you got to encourage Asians to help other Asians, right?
Absolutely.
Because there's really a culture of, in Asian families to help your family members, right? But not so much to help other people as mentors and so forth. And we got to change that, because that's a big part of the game, right?
Yep. But, I think mentors, sometimes could be, it doesn't always have to be an Asian mentoring another
Right.
Asian, right? I think any kind of mentorship is a good one. But I think as a woman, as an Asian woman, I try to mentor as many as possible. I know Deb is the same. Because I think we are in a unique position and want to make a difference. As we said, we want to see more women in leadership position. We want to see more women of color in boardroom. The only way we can do that is really help each other get there.
Yeah, I think that's right. Now, the last question before we address some of the Q&A, and we have a number of questions here, is what advice would you give this audience about what they can do as individuals to either further their careers without an ethnic career ceiling, or help women and other Asian Americans in the business community succeed? So what advice would you want the audience to take away from this panel?
Well, I think one is, and I write about this. I have a newsletter in Substack, so it's
which I just read your newsletter this morning.
Well, I actually wrote about this morning, which is called Escape Velocity: How to Manage.
Oh, I loved it.
And I think that what we often do is we're kind of taught, the heads down, get it done, execution, and we're seen as doers, right? Not leaders. And so it's important that you also are a leader. Find your voice, find ways to kind of express and bring up your point of view. Learn to kind of share your vision to, we're seen as less strategic, show your chops in those areas, because I think it's incredibly important that, people see a diversity of Asian leaders. The other thing I would say is, find a sponsor. The areas when I've been most successful in my career are actually times when someone else saw something in me and said, I will open the door for you. That is how the entire corporate system works, is that someone who has more power opens the door for someone with less. And, Jenny and I do this now, for example, we're both on boards, and I actually get invited to boards probably every week. And I actually have a list of amazing board members who have similar qualities, but are probably better than me to serve on a board, since obviously at this point I'm fairly busy with a couple boards. And Jenny is on several boards, but I'm sure she's asked a lot too. How do we pay that forward? We need to help one another and bring each other up that mountain together. And so I keep a list of amazing people. I recommend them constantly to every invitation I get. I cultivate the list. And I think that this paying it forward is part of our responsibility as leaders in this industry. And you don't have to be very senior to start paying it forward. You just have to start mentoring and sponsoring people early, and then hope and seek out sponsors of your own as you grow.
Yeah, that's right. Jenny, any comment on what advice you would give the audience?
First of all, I would so agree with what Deb said, because we actually share, we had coffee, a few months ago when I met her, and we both really believe in helping other women, especially Asian women, to get on boards. And we keep the same, list, and we answer every call we get so we could recommend people. But I would say, the first thing I would say, really don't be afraid to do something uncomfortable, because I think we all fall into the trap of doing what we are good at, what we're comfortable with. This is not how you grow. You have to really grow when you're doing something uncomfortable and put yourself out there. Like, Deb said, find your voice. But for me, it's really find, not to be afraid to do something different than what you've always done. I have this motto that I follow, which is really have served me well. Really is don't be complacent. I think we all fall in that trap. Really have the courage and conviction to broaden your scope or broaden your horizon, and even though you might fail, but I am a big believer not have any regrets in your life. So this is something I follow, and it has served me well.
Yeah. Another piece of advice that I would give is choose the industry and choose the company wisely. And I'll give you a story. About a week ago, a young Chinese American male, he asked whether he could get some advice because he wasn't happy where he was. So we talked for an hour and a half on the phone, and I had him walk through his career and talk about what he liked and so forth, so on. And at the end, he had been at 3 large corporations, same industry, right? And had moved, and I said, something? Has it occurred to you that you just don't fit a large corporation? Because everything you say suggests that you don't like politics, right? And you don't like to have to focus on it. And although you can have politics at a small firm, it is almost certain that there are politics at a large company. And so moving from one large company to another large company to another large company doesn't solve the problem. I think the problem is you shouldn't work for a large company. And it was funny because he just hadn't thought about it, right? He thought it was a problem with the company as opposed to that. So I think one of the keys is, know yourself, but choose wisely in terms of the type of industry and the type of company, because you may not fit technology. You might really fit the arts, or you might fit retail, but also size of company and so forth may be different. So one piece of advice is know yourself and then try to find a place that fits, and certainly avoid things where you're not good at it, right? Yeah. So let's see now. We have quite a few questions here, and some are just comments. So let me just scroll through here. And there's one here from a long one. Okay, so this one I'll summarize because it's a long one. And this person said they're from the Philippines, and his parents raised them to be soft-spoken, it might make eye contact with men, and not to be assertive, and not to go after things that I want. And that influenced my career. So how do you address the way how that some Asian families and their communities grow up and play a role relative to girls, right, in the family? And how do you, I guess, make sure that just doesn't happen, right?
I think it's hard to change culture, right? It's hard that the next generation, Jenny and I raised our kids, and we have daughters as well, very differently than we were raised. And I think that the next generation will benefit from seeing their mothers having worked in the American environments and be extremely assertive. But I do think that, so many of us, including myself, was just taught to not be too showy, not speak up too loud, to be kind of quiet. And it worked for me until it didn't. And so I do think, we are taught to be introverted and quiet, and it hasn't served us well. And so what I would do is, treat learning to speak up and being assertive as a skill. We were taught this, and yes, generations of our parents were taught this as well. But if you treat it as a skill, just like learning a language or learning to play the piano, you can learn the skills. It's not like Jenny and I were born ready to become president and CEO of companies. We worked really hard at it. And I think that you might look at us and say, wow, I could never be like that. But actually, I don't think we thought we could be like that. I definitely couldn't when I came out of college, and I had an engineering degree, and I kind of never spoke to anyone. And so, and I was very comfortable doing that until I realized I was going to fail to the next thing I was going to do if I didn't figure this out. And so I do think that that's the advice I would have, is treat this as a skill and learn it. Learn to be assertive, learn to speak up, or else you can't reach the position we're in. But I think we couldn't have reached this position without doing a lot of that work ourselves.
Yeah. Now, let me get this straight. Do the two of you each have 3 daughters, or it's actually
No, I have 2 daughters and a son.
Oh, okay.
I have 2 daughters.
So that
I feel very sorry for the son, because the sons are outnumbered there. So
but
Actually, the
I
shy
would say
one.
both our sons probably appreciate all the feminine traits, right?
yeah, well, I guess that's right. Well, Jenny, you have any comments?
Yeah, I would say it's so true. I always say, I mean it sincerely, that if I could succeed and be a leader, everybody can. I'm not kidding. It's because like I said, I was very bashful. I barely spoke up, and I still have my quiet time, but like I said, you have to choose when to bring your point of view in. That things that matters to you, things that you care about, you have to speak up. And things that you don't, it doesn't matter, or you don't care about, you don't have to speak up. But learning, I learned that, when I do presentation, I would raise my hand first. So I didn't even have time to say, oops, I have to present first, because, or, when I first didn't want to speak in public, I would, I chose to start speaking in high school and college first, because that was a little bit more comfort and a little easier before I spoke in large crowd with, in business. So I think the only way you could do well, and is, as Steph said, is you have to, it's like learning a skill. You have to keep practicing. You have to put yourself out there, and you have to be okay sometimes that you're not perfection, but that's okay. But that's part of learning. So, that's the only ways to learn, is really speaking out and having a point of view and expressing it, and keep doing it. And you get to a point that you're comfortable, just like doing a panel like this.
Now, this next question, actually, if it's just repetitive to how you would answer, then you let me know and we can move to the next one. But one of the, one person in the audience says, what would you tell your younger self in your 20s and your 30s? And then said, thank you. Of course, they're assuming that the two of you are older than 30, but putting that aside, right? So what would you tell, if you had a chance to travel back in time and have 10 minutes with yourself when you were 20 or 30, what would you say? That's basically the question.
I would say that, and I always give this advice to every panel that because I often ask this question in panels I'm on, which is always have a learning mindset. Someone who's always learning is always going to exceed someone who has more talent.
Yeah.
I'm not an outspoken person. I would have been horrified to think that I was going to speak to 100 people like this, but I've spoken to live audiences of 5,000, and it's streamed to 1 million people. And so I have done it, but it's because I learned it. And so if you're kind of constantly pushing yourself to learn and drive yourself forward, you will always exceed those who have talent, who are fixed. And so, you might not have the affinity for it, and that's okay. But, just like almost everyone learns how to walk, they don't know how to speak. you can learn almost anything if you put enough time into it. And so I encourage everybody to say, you know what, you might have some natural affinity and passion for certain things, but there are certain skills like speaking up and being assertive that is necessary for success in the corporate environment. And that's just something you can't avoid. And so learn those things and get better at it. And it's super uncomfortable and it's hard, but at the same time, we would not be where we are today had we not done this earlier in our career.
Yeah. And Jenny, what advice would you give a younger self?
Well, I think for me is probably believing in myself more. I really, had doubts. I was just happy, reaching to be a buyer, which I, was able to do in my mid-20s. But after that, I'm like, wow, pretty much everything else is gravy. So really believing in myself, I really did not expect to be where I end up to be. So having, I would say loftier goal, that really believing that I could be more than what I set out to be. But I have to say, adding to what Deb said is like, you have to be a continuous learner, even in my age, which I'm much, much older than my 20s and 30s, right? I don't think you could stop learning. And that's kind of what makes life exciting and new, is because there's always something new, is ever changing. So I would consider myself, a student in life, right? That you want to keep learning. And I think that it gives you confidence to really speak up, be relevant to what is going on in the world today. We both sit on many boards, and you can't not be relevant if you're not learning every day. So I would really highly recommend that.
Yeah, that's right. And I sit on a lot of boards as well, and I think one of the things that always comes up also when we talk about trying to get new members of the board or officers is, and it sort of ties a little bit to what you're saying, which is there's IQ and then there's EQ, right? And I think you have to be good at both, right? And I think not only do you have to be more assertive, but you have to be good at understanding people and relating to them and understanding their point of view, right? And if you grow up in an Asian American family, you're not naturally going to be in tune to what the general world, how they view things, right? Because you're in a different environment. But so you sort of have to force your way to do that. There's a question for Deb, and that is, you grew up in a rural South as a sole Asian American and also the only Asian American, I guess, in your community. And so, what was it like? I will say that I had the same experience. I grew up in Virginia the first 10 years, and my two sisters and I were the only Asians like in the entire Northern Virginia. And we were at a school, and there are only 3 Asians out of like a couple thousand, and that was us. And the only reason why they didn't discriminate against is they thought we were from Mars. They didn't know what the hell we were. So we were that to them, they thought we were like a curiosity. So, you don't discriminate against Martians, right? So we didn't get discrimination until we got older. So Deb, how about your experience? Because the South is not known for being, shall we say, understanding, right?
I would say that, imagine you spend your life where everybody considers you the other for like so we moved there when I was 6. So I do remember what it was like not to live like that. And then we stayed until I was 18 and went to college. And of course I go to Duke. So it's in North Carolina. My husband said the kinder, gentler South. But, I just was looking at growing up, it was just so different. Like being one of the few Asian families that we knew, having people tell you, having people say to you, what are you? Having people discriminate against you and taunt you constantly. It was a reminder that you were never going to belong. And, it taught me actually to be as quiet as possible. If I drew no attention to myself, maybe people wouldn't, people would crank call our house all the time and, make ching chong noises. They would say things that were just, people egged our house and threw rocks at us. And people would go up to my parents in the street and actually tell them, why don't you go back to where you came from? And it's just,
oh yeah, that's pretty common, right?
Pretty common for those of you who are from those areas. And you realize like being the other teaches you, wow, I don't belong, but then where would I belong, right? Because, I didn't grow up where my parents grew up. They're from Hong Kong, and so we would visit, and people in Hong Kong be like, oh, you're so American, and you realize you didn't belong anywhere. And I think that level of alienation, it took me a while to get over. And it's so interesting because my kids have no idea what that's like. They keep asking, what was it like? Because here we live in Palo Alto across from Stanford, and it's a totally different life, right? And so it's just they live a completely different existence, and they're like, you should bring us there so we can see the South. And I'm like, I have not gone back in 15, 20 years because I'm just so alienated from that life. And I think it's hard, but at the same time, I realize it's made me who I am today. In a lot of ways, it's taught me so much because it taught me grit and a level of, someone asked about a chip on your shoulder in the comments. Part of that was it was the drive I needed to get a scholarship to college, to do well in college. I can get into a great job so I can go to business school. And so I could never have to go back. And so, I mean, in some ways it was the best thing that happened to me, even though it was probably the hardest things that ever happened to me.
I want to end with the following question, which wasn't one that we talked about, but I think is quite relevant, and that is, we're in a really bad environment right now about Asian American hate and so forth, and of course a lot of it also is because of the relationship between the U.S. and China, and so someone said one of the few bipartisan opinions in Washington D.C. is we don't like China, right? So I guess really the question, and we have these hate crimes that are happening and so forth. So to be frank about it, do you think that that this is going to make it harder around this issue of getting promoted and so forth? And if so, what can individuals do to try to mitigate this issue, right?
I actually don't. First of all, I think with so much light shining on it right now, I think most company or corporations are paying attention. They certainly want to listen to what we can do. I certainly on most of my board is talking about it. So I always look at things like, what opportunity do we have? What can we do about it? What can we make it better? So I think first is really having a forum for people to be able to express and talk about it, and is very important versus, closed door and whisper and not talking about it is not an answer. So I think for most companies is having a forum for people to express how they feel and learn from it, and how can we help them is to me is a first step, is listening.
Are you also saying that maybe because it's an issue, it becomes harder for them to ignore? Is that?
No, I say that's why you have to listen, so you can ignore it. Make sure you're not ignoring it. I think ignoring something doesn't go away. I think a lot of people thinks it does, but it doesn't. Actually, it builds up even more frustration.
Yeah. Deb, your view?
Well, I think that for so long, like it's interesting. I grew up in the South, and with a lot of the recent hate crimes, I just hear so much about the stories of other people growing up similarly. So from small towns in Washington, from the South, from all over. And I realized that we just never talked about it. Like the Asian community has been so quiet. And then, last year, my cousin was punched in the face and spat on, during COVID in the streets of New York. And this has happened to so many of our relatives, but for so long, everyone just never talked about it. And I think by shining the light, this will be a chance for our community to say, you know what, it's not okay, that this is enough, that we need to speak up. We need to share these stories because, it feels like an isolated incident when you grow up in a small town because you think, well, it's maybe just me. If I were just less objectionable, maybe it just happened to my cousin. But if this happens in every family, think about the thousands of families that have been impacted, the number of people who've been impacted by hate crimes. And I think that, we've reached a place where we can't be silent anymore. And so it's incredibly important that we do speak up now, because I think it's so hard for other people to see it. And I think that we can learn a lot from other communities where they say, it's enough. And we want to share these stories and we want to talk about it and we want to force other people to see us and, not just keep our heads down.
Yeah. And I would strongly, from what you were saying about learning from others, I would strongly recommend that anyone who did not attend the webcast with Professors Morrison and Liu, where they looked at different ethnic groups within, I would encourage you, because I have a lot of friends who are South Asian and so forth, And they do have some things that they do that have made a difference. And one of them, by the way, one of the variables is exactly what the two of you talked about, which is assertiveness, right? And they said, by the way, there was no data that suggested that whether you had an accent or not, there was no evidence that having an accent made a difference, right? So it had a lot to do with style and the way you develop friendships and mentorship, but also assertiveness. So I want to say we are at the end of our hour. First of all, I really want to thank the two of you, Jenny and Deb. You were really terrific, and I think I hope the audience felt that they came away with some personal stories, but also some lessons. And this is being recorded, and in a few days it will be available on the Committee 100 website. It's a little bit like Netflix, so you can like binge watch, right? So if you want to, you just put it on repeat and then just watch Jenny and Deb, over and over again. It works for Netflix, so it should work for this one as well. But also I want to encourage everyone to attend the next one, which is on July 17th, and that one's a different format and different question, but it's future oriented, and that is, what can we do better, right? Because we need to do some things that we're not doing, or do some of the things we're doing better than we're doing now. So thank you so much again, and I want to thank the audience for these wonderful questions that you have, and look forward to seeing many of you at our next events.
And thank you for all the comments. I appreciate it. I know Deb and I appreciate it.
Thank you
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
Yes, I had fun with all of you.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Take care. Bye.